Our next speaker in the lineup is Senior Product Manager Jared Haleck. Jared was a part of the launch team at InsideSales.com with Dave Elkington and Ken Krogh back in 2004. As co-founder over business development, Jared spent his time driving initial customer acquisition through the first year of the company. Since rejoining the company over a year ago, Jared has led the product development team in delivering solutions that have continued to advance InsideSales.com's market leadership. Join me in InsideSales.com in welcoming Jared to the Sales Acceleration Summit.
Well, thank you for that introduction. In my role here at Inside Sales, like it was mentioned, I run the product team. So I spend a lot of time thinking about sort of the next wave of technology and how we can apply it to the sales process. And what we're going to be talking about today is the next disruption in sales. Now, for us here at Inside Sales, this is very much the here and now. It's what we think about every single day. But for a lot of you who are joining us, this may be the first time you've really given serious consideration to how predictive analytics, big data, or data science can and should be applied to the sales process. So we're going to explore that today, and hopefully each of you can leave this session with a better understanding of how we got to this state where predictive analytics is so very much talked about, and also how you can legitimately apply predictive analytics to your sales organization. So how did we get here? Well, in order to really understand how we got to a predictive sales disruption, we have to kind of understand first the virtual or inside sales disruption. And for many of you who are attending this event, you obviously know that inside sales as a model of selling really gained its rise in the early and mid-2000s as web technologies began to enable the sales process to take place remote from customers. And so through these technologies, salespeople have been selling using Salesforce.com, other hosted technologies, not the least of which are communication technologies like GoToMeeting. And in this sort of new world of selling, there's been a tremendous amount of data that's been created through the use of these technologies, which has really precipitated the rise of this next disruption in sales called predictive sales. And we're very, very early, in my opinion, in this disruption. A couple of things to note here. 90% of the world's data has been created in the last 12 months, and less than 1% of it is being utilized in any meaningful way to improve processes, and in our case, the sales process. So one of the reasons why we don't do anything meaningful with all of this data that's been created is because it's hard, right? We're using a traditional brute force method of trying to understand and make sense and normalize and categorize data. And that's a lot of work. And a couple of things have happened over the last decade which have led us to this point where we're at a tipping point where the data is actually actionable. Number one, we can store the data. We have the capability and the capacity to store it. We have the computing power to process it, and then the methodologies that sort of act as the standard for how we compute the data, that has also evolved tremendously over the last 10 years. And so what we think about is we think, well, if we have all of this data, how do we appropriately capture it? How do we process it? And where do we apply it in the sales process? And that's where modern data science and machine learning come into play. And these, machine learning specifically as a technology category, allow us to process this large and vast amount of data in a way that we've never been able to process in the past.
And so the philosophy of data science, machine learning, and other predictive technologies is that people are pattern-based in their decision-making process. And if you can take a data set, particularly the vast amount of data that's been created in the last several years respective of the sales process, and you could apply the right tool set and the right methodologies to that data in observing patterns, you have the ability to potentially predict future behavior. And in a sales process, you can see how valuable that is. I could predict, who are the people that are most likely to purchase from me, when they're most likely to purchase from me, when they're most likely to engage with in a conversation with a sales rep. Furthermore, you can also predict, what reps would be most productive in your sales organization. There's a variety of different things that you could use machine learning and other predictive technologies to inform and instruct you as a sales leader in such a way that you can optimize and accelerate sales in your organization. Well, the reality is that leaders of industry today are thinking a lot about how to apply and where to apply predictive analytics in their enterprise. And 54% of C-suite executives believe that boosting sales is a top advantage of predictive analytics. And that data is actually a couple of years old. It came from a study from SAP a couple of years ago. And so it's incumbent upon us as sales leaders to be thinking about this, because if we're not thinking about how to apply and where predictive analytics could fit in our sales process, respective of helping us improve sales and ultimately increase and accelerate sales, if we're not thinking about it, it's likely that our competition is. Additionally, one of the standard bearers of our industry is a gentleman by the name of Scott Santucci, and he is the principal analyst at Forrester over the sales practice. And he says that when you focus on the science of sales, you achieve breakthrough performance. So let's get to it. We're going to spend the rest of our time talking about how we can apply data science and predictive analytics to the sales process. And as many of you are aware, here at Inside Sales, we have a variety of products and capabilities that apply data science to the sales process. And so we're going to talk about, just briefly, a framework for thinking about where data science could and should be applied in the sales process. And we'll talk also just briefly about some of the areas in which we help organizations improve their sales process through the application of predictive analytics. So just to establish a framework of thinking, when you think about the sales process, there's essentially two actors in the sales process. There's your salespeople, and then there are your prospects. And then there are the activities that bind them together, which is to say the number of interactions, the type of interactions that occur throughout the sales process. And the way that we think about this is we think about using a machine learning platform. In our case, we call it Neuralytics. And we use this platform to predict the right combination of people, prospects, and activities that bind the people and their prospects together in any given sales process. And so we want to think about the whole sales process and how to apply machine learning more holistically than just to, maybe any given, point within the sales process. And that actually is one of the top advantages of using a machine learning approach, which is to say I'm not just sort of creating a statistical analysis about one given lever within the sales process. I have the advantage through the use of machine learning to apply data science to the entire scope of the sales process, which is reflected here in this framework. So with that framework, we're going to go through an exercise here and point out a variety of different places where predictive analytics could be applied to the sales process. So this is the classic sales problem. There are good prospects, and then there are worse prospects. And good versus worst, or best versus worst, refer to the likelihood of these prospects to purchase anything from us. Now, our experience shows us, through the use of our Neuralytics platform, that best versus worse is there's about a 10x difference, or at least a 10x difference between good leads and bad leads, respective of their likelihood to close. And that's a really, really significant difference. Now, here's the reality, right? This is the law of scarcity at play. You generally have more of your worst prospects and less of your best prospects. So the very first place where predictive analytics is useful to a sales organization is to create visibility respective of what is the distribution of your leads respective of good or best versus worst. So here's an example of a typical sales organization, right? So on the gray bars, you see the reality that most of your leads are actually not very actionable, and that your best leads represent a smaller quantity of your entire lead set. Without visibility into what's good versus bad, as an organization, you spend an inordinate amount of time down here in the worst bucket. Recently, we implemented a customer where they were spending let me say it another way. They were working 50% of their very worst leads. And then on the top end, they were only working 25% of their very best leads. Now, to kind of give you an example of what the close rates were, in this example that I'm referring to, the leads in the worst bucket for this customer, the close rate was 0.0%. We're talking about thousands and thousands of leads. If I remember correctly, over a 2-month period, the number of leads that they had worked down here was in excess of 6,000 leads, while at the same time, they weren't even taking advantage of their very, very best leads. And so that's the very first place where predictive analytics becomes useful, is to help identify who are the people that are most likely to purchase from you so that you can align your effort to those people. And so the next place to apply predictive analytics to the sales process is to prescribe the activity or workflow for your sales organizations in such a way that you are disproportionately working your very best leads versus your very worst leads. Now, there's a variety of different ways that you can do that through a rules-based prioritization engine. But what I'm referring to specifically here is the use of predictive analytics to understand the timing of not only understand the propensity of people to purchase from you, but also the timing at which you should reach out to them. And so there's a lot of use cases that can be solved through the use of machine learning, respective of when is the best time to reach out to somebody who might be interested in purchasing from you. Now, if you're using predictive analytics to understand your best prospects from your worst prospects, and then using some of those same techniques to prescribe the activities of your sales team in such a way that you're working inordinately or disproportionately, the leads on the right-hand side of the scale here, you're going to find a natural byproduct, which is increased capacity. Another way of saying this is that currently reps spend anywhere from 15 to 20 and sometimes even as much as 30 minutes between calls just trying to understand who they should work with next. And by predictively prescribing the sequence in which reps should be working their prospects, you're going to see a lot of increased capacity on the team. Another thing that you see referenced here is motivation. And that is another technique that you can use to increase capacity on your team. And when I refer to motivation, I'm thinking of gamification, or thinking of things like leaderboards and challenges and achievements and badges. And there are a number of interesting ways where predictive analytics can be pointed at a gamification scenario to increase capacity on a team. One of the ways that we do this in our gamification product called Power Standings is in a challenge scenario when notifications are being fed to an individual rep, giving them insight into whether or not they've just taken the lead or someone's about to pass them. We use different kinds of communication techniques that are designed to target individual preferences. And the thinking behind that is that if I can understand how an individual is motivated in terms of how that communication activity should be rendered to them, I can ultimately get better performance out of that rep. And so the idea here is, as a natural byproduct of using predictive analytics in your sales process, either just through optimizing workflow or applying it to a gamification or motivation scenario, you can increase capacity and production on the team. Now, the reality is, even though we've used predictive technologies at this point to identify the right prospects a team should be working with and the right sequence in which they should be working with them, not all of them are ready to engage at any given time. And so we use a predictive technology that helps you understand who's engaged in the sales process at any given moment. And what this does is this allows sales reps to align their effort and their time towards the real opportunities in their pipeline. And so with that, as reps are obviously spending more time in that which is more productive, overall production on the team, respective of dollars or close rates per sales rep, increases. So thus far we've talked about the application of predictive analytics in identifying your best prospects, then also identifying the right sequence of activities or the activity performance to transact against those best prospects. The final piece that we're going to talk about is the application of predictive analytics towards hiring the very, very best salespeople. 3 years in a row, we've conducted a study with sales leaders across the country. And always in the top 3 problems that sales leaders are trying to solve for is the hiring problem. And one of the reasons why sales leaders are so concerned about hiring and hiring the best people is that the reality is salespeople are the most expensive employee in an organization. Not because of their burden costs, or in other words, what you pay them, but because of the quota that they carry. And sales reps become particularly expensive when they underperform. And so every sales leader wants to hire the dream team. And so through the use of predictive analytics, you can identify in a hiring scenario who are going to be your best sales reps. And here is how that actually translates into real business value. When you hire sales reps that are top performers, they obviously generate more revenue. And in this example, to be more specific, one of the areas where top sales reps perform is they perform in the area where your prospects maybe aren't the best fit at the outset. Another way of saying that is that any sales rep can close the ideal or easy deals, if that makes sense. It's when the deals or the prospects are more complicated in their needs and the solutions that they're looking for that the very best sales reps excel. So you can see in this chart here, you see a bump here in close rates sort of down the prospect spectrum. In our product called Sales Indicator, when we predict a sales rep is going to hit quota, of all of those sales reps who we predict will hit quota, average quota attainment is 127%. And for the sales reps who we predicted won't hit quota and the company hires them anyways, average quota attainment is about 67%. And we're doing that to a degree of accuracy of between 85 and 90%, which if you're familiar with that space, those kinds of accurate results are tremendous. And so by hiring the right people, you can increase and then generate more revenue because you've got the best people on your team. So like we said at the outset, the place where predictive analytics can be applied in the sales process to accelerate sales is to predict the right sales reps in your organization that should be selling for you, the right prospects you should be selling to, and then the right activities and the sequence of those activities that engage a sales rep with their prospects. And if you can do that predictively on top of a machine learning platform, in our case, Neurolytics, you can drive revenue results and increase and accelerate revenue throughout your sales organization. And when you apply predictive analytics in your sales process against, optimizing for the right people, the right prospects, and the right activity performance, you can see up to 15 to 30% increase in revenue in an organization where you're already highly optimized. We see much greater revenue results for those people who are not as highly optimized as they could be, and so there's even more opportunity for those kinds of organizations. So I hope that everybody today has felt like something here has been instructive for them and helping them understand sort of the landscape of predictive analytics and why it's an emerging disruption here in our sales industry, and then specifically where you could apply predictive technologies within your sales process to accelerate sales. And finally, thank you very much for spending some time with me today as I shared my perspective on predictive analytics as the next disruption in sales. We hope you guys have a great summit and have a wonderful day. Thank you. Bye-bye.